Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Courageous Survivor. This is going to be an episode for my Courageous Conversations. It has been a crazy 2 weeks. And if you've heard anything about my story, like faith has been a big part of that. And over the last week, there has just been a lot of eye-opening, heart-opening, and just this huge God winks, as I call them, like these huge impacts that I really needed to just take the time and sit with them, process some emotions, and kind of see like how and if this changes anything about how I want to move forward with my speaking. And the reason why I'm saying this is, so first I recorded a podcast with a gentleman from the Broken Brains podcast. His name is Denny. And so he has a lot of like military background. And so the same day that I do this podcast with him as a guest on his podcast, as we're talking about military people. So we're talking basically about survivors of, abuse and domestic violence and strangulation, and then the military side of things about how our medical system and stuff are just not set up to help these populations of people. And so I've been watching this series on Paramount called it has something to do with SEAL team. And so later that day, I do this podcast, so I kind of just take some time to just decompress. And so I'm watching this episode, and there's a member of the team who starts like having a lot of like, you can tell that he has some mental illness type of stuff looking. And so one of the main members of the team had an injury to his leg in combat. And so he's off work. And so this friend who's kind of really struggling kind of stays with him. Well, there's this part where while the guy who's hurt is in the hospital, he's staying at his place. And when the member gets released from the hospital and he comes back to his apartment, there's like all these notes, these sticky notes posted all over the place. The house is very disheveled and disorganized. And then he kind of like, as they're working through things, he ends up leaving something on the stove, and as it's, the stove is on and basically burnt. And there was just this, like, I started crying from watching this show because, I ended up binge watching like 3 or 4 episodes because he goes to the VA and he's trying to get this diagnosis of traumatic brain injury, and they're just saying it's mental health. And so they just keep shoving more meds down his throat instead of being able to give him the diagnosis because they can't do an MRI. And it's like this big battle. And like at that moment, it's almost like I was reliving what I went through, and I was so connected. Like whoever wrote that script did a phenomenal job of really kind of painting the picture of what it's like. I don't know, I can't tell you from the military side of things if like that's how it really is about navigating the VA. But as a survivor of domestic violence and near fatal strangulation with, anoxic injury and traumatic brain injury from abuse, that is exactly how I felt. I was like, this is a legitimate problem for a lot of survivors, for military men and women, just all of this stuff that people have to just, you know, fight so hard for themselves. And the sad part of it is, and this is where I like lost it watching this show, and I really needed to kind of just take some time to process this, is he goes out, he begs and begs and begs for the MRI and to get the diagnosis. And he was basically told that's not going to happen. They try to give him a script. His friend is waiting in line for the script. And he goes out to the truck and he commits suicide. And I think about my own journey and how I was there. Like, doctor after doctor after doctor kept giving me diagnosis and after diagnosis and medicine after medicine after medicine and prescription. And like, I was sucked into this for like 2 years. 2 years. And like, I was at the point where I was ready to commit suicide. And it's very, very frustrating. And I keep thinking about how many people, and when I was doing that podcast on the Broken Brains, like, we talked about suicide and think about how many military people and survivors are committing suicide because the right people don't know the right information, and we're getting lost in this medical system that doesn't need to happen because our systems are so stuck in profit over people. And it was very difficult. And then yesterday, so I don't know, it's been a few weeks ago, this lady named Beth from Vegas had reached out to me along with Dr. Bill Smock about talking to a conference in Las Vegas. So I'll be doing that here in an hour and a half, actually. So it's the Nevada Strangulation Seminar. So Beth is going to be bringing me in on her segment, and Dr. Smock had kind of given her some of my information. He uses my case for a lot of his strangulation training. And she was gracious enough to pass along her PowerPoint to me. So just so I kind of knew what they were going to be talking, like what they were talking about, me and my case. And let me tell you about how, like, I cried a lot. And, in my previous podcast, I talked about like how you have the stress hormones and how we have our feel-good chemicals. My next one, I'm going to be talking about like being stuck in fight or flight, and kind of like the limbic system and stuff. And let me tell you, you talk about triggered. So in a couple of slides, like, I've seen the pictures and like, I see all of that stuff all the time. But there's a piece of the police report that's in there, and it talks about having the shotgun held to my head. And that didn't bother me so much. But the part that really, really hit hard for me was this one particular slide. And all it says is at the top, April 2017. And so it's got 4 little boxes. And it just talks about, so the first box says Paula attends FGC, which is the Family Justice Center conference in Wisconsin, and meets Jim Henderson. And then the next box says Jim Henderson brings her to meet Dr. Bill Smock. Next one says Dr. Bill Smock interviews Paula, TBI. And then the last one says Dr. Bill Smock called Paula's family, MD, and talked about the TBI. So when people ask me about why I believe in God and about these things, like, I was broke at that time. I had no business going all the way to Wisconsin to a family justice center conference. It was some fluke thing, but I felt so um, moved and convicted to go to this conference. So two of my friends went with me. We happened to run into, so this big old conference that we happened to run into James Henderson, who puts me in front of Bill Smock. And like, I think about, I was over 300 miles away from home. And that introduction, that conversation, that God given meeting changed my life, because it was in Dr. Smock calling my primary care, who finally ordered an MRI and some testing to try to figure out what was going on with me. And like, he explained it to me, and like, that's what led me to fight so hard that I didn't have MS, I didn't have POTS and neurocardiogenic syncope and all these different medical diagnoses that they kept giving me. They kept giving me all of these, giving me meds, yet I wasn't getting any better. I was actually getting worse. And to me, if you have to keep getting a refill on your prescriptions, you like, at what point, when I'm taking a medicine and I've taken them for a year and yet I'm getting worse, when should I expect for it to work? Like, isn't that the whole point? And so that was very frustrating for me, because I knew I was not sick in the way that all of these specialists were telling me. And so like, it hit me how impactful having like these chance meetings, and how having meet this one particular person, the power of one. I talk about that all the time. So one doctor, like James, what a tool he was of God to be able to, introduce me to Dr. Smock, who then opened up the doors. And, Dr. Smock talked to my family practice doc, but there was only so much she could do, because the neurologists were telling her, no, this isn't what it is. The cardiologist was telling her no. Like, everybody was telling her no, and she was trying so hard to fight for me, but she's just a family practice doctor, and they wouldn't listen to her. And they didn't care who Dr. Smock was. And so it was just very frustrating, but he empowered me as a survivor by listening to me, by opening up my thought process, that like, I didn't have this horrible, complicated MS that, and everything that they were saying, like, it just opened up the door for me to fight for myself, which led me to go to functional neurology, which then led me to be now where I am today, with all of those diagnoses gone. And I have a traumatic brain injury. Like, I have a brain injury, which gives me a lot of those symptoms. And it's not like I'm fixed. I have to work hard for that. But like, I now know how to advocate better for myself. And it just, like, it's been this horrible, eye-opening experience that I'm like, we really need to change the system. We need to really, like, I feel very convicted to be more open about my experiences, which is why I'm going to keep doing these courageous conversations and keep doing my podcast, and keep saying yes when people ask me to share my story, because there's so many people out there like me. And it's not just survivors, it's military people. I mean, in all walks of life, there are tons of people walking around with all of these symptoms, and they probably have undiagnosed brain injury. And the medical system is set up for failure for us. Actually, I think the whole medical system is set up wrong anyways, but that's a whole nother topic. But like, So for instance, I went out to San Francisco last week. So I have become a trainer for the Futures Without Violence Q's program for healthcare. So I was out in San Francisco for 4 days. People do not realize like that, like I've been home for a week and I am still recovering from like the jet lag, from the stress of flying, from like just everything, being a whole nother environment. San Francisco is a whole different city than what I'm used to living in my little, 600 people town. It's just very, very different. And there has been a lot of, it impacted a lot of parts of my brain and my body. And I'm trying to get myself back into, the swing of things and in my, doing my brain exercises and getting back to eating healthy. It's not like when I train locally where I can pack my lunch and take my stuff with me. There's only so much that I can take in my suitcase. And so like I kind of wrecked my gut a little bit, kind of messed up my brain. And it takes me a minute, usually a week or two to recover from that. And so it's just been a really rough 2 weeks. God has been working. And, I've been told like consistency is the key on posting. But man, I agree. But who am I to say, sorry, God, like I need to make sure that I do my social media. I got to make sure I do my podcast. I got to make sure I do this. You're going to have to wait. No, he has kept me alive. He has walked me through this and he has stood beside me. And so when I feel very convicted that the Holy Spirit or Jesus is working on me, and I'm going to sit down and listen, because who am I to tell him no? Especially after so many things in my life that he has been evident that he has been working in my life, that there's no other way to explain it than God. So I just like, I'm back. I'm so excited. We're going to be, I'm going to be launching an actual podcast either later today or first thing tomorrow, kind of talking about the rational brain versus the emotional brain. So like our prefrontal cortex versus our limbic system and how trauma impacts those. Because let me tell you, I think that that's a big, huge part of problem in our country right now. People are stuck in reacting and thinking and everything with their emotional brain. A lot of people are not rational. You cannot have conversations, rational conversations, like objective conversations. Everything is subjective and everything is like emotional. And I think that that is a very dangerous place to be. I've lived there and I was not a very good Paula. I was not a very nice Paula. I didn't like me much. I look back at that Paula and she hurt a lot of people. And yeah, so that podcast is coming. But I'm going to leave you with this. Whatever it is, just remember that the power of one, saying hello, saying you matter, you're important to me, giving that last hug, whatever it is, man, you don't know who the other person on the other end of your words or your actions, you have no idea what they're going through. And so meeting them where they are and giving them kindness and respect and empowering them when you can, like you have no idea how God's going to use that, or you have no idea how that can change their life. Just like the words of Bill Smock and calling my doctor and just believing me and listening to me, he changed my life. You too can change somebody's life. You never know who a decade from now is going to say, this person, changed my life by listening or whatever. So show up. The power of one. It only takes one person to change somebody's life. So let's all work on that. And again, thank you for joining me. My name is Paula Walters, and I appreciate you. And you have a blessed day.